In addition, the tough guy promised to call again if he needed to ask anything else. When he let him down, his companion appeared to have a low complex, though he had no small package. As he said goodbye, he smugly added that he had heard about the Jeju Island situation and would like to help with the raid, but that he was a busy man. In fact, it would be different if South Korea had enough money to hire him. Chief Jin Chul offered to escort him in the form of a hunter from the oversight department. Certainly, he didn't care. And he asked to make sure their conversation stayed between them. Wagunhee's last half hour seemed like an absolute lie, and his offer of help on the upcoming raid seemed like a sham. His subordinate tried to reassure him with information about the confirmation of cooperation with Japan. A hunter from a high-profile Japanese guild is scheduled to visit South Korea today. The castle of the Garshur clan was ablaze and shaking from the terror that Sung Jin Woo had inflicted. In one fell swoop, he defeated all the demon knights on the ring wall. And just as easily, he silenced the demon nobleman forever. Apparently, the system gives a lot of experience because of their high level, and there was also an unlocked increase in the level of the shadows, Igris and Tank. The monarch returned to Lady Easel and told her the good news. And at the same minute a request for a promotion came in and he approved it positively. The shadows swirled in a whirlpool, intertwining over their heads. Knight Igris was promoted to the rank of Elite Knight, and Tank to the rank of Knight accordingly. Needless to say, Tank didn't officially have a name until then, for he was just a shadow monster. But now the system itself suggested calling him Tank. Igris's aura was so strong that it was visible to the naked eye. Undoubtedly, he gained S-rank power, while at the same time his new knight gained the power of a higher A rank. The girl interrupted his admiration to ask how many clans Jin Woo had already destroyed. Since this is the 89th floor, excluding Lady Essel's clan, it must be 9. She was horrified. After all, starting from the 9th floor everyone would be controlled by high-ranking nobleman clans, and that's a whole other level. She even had the idea of negotiating with them the same way she had before, with the Raider clan. Apparently, this made Song Jin Woo laugh, because he replied that if he were weaker, her clan would not negotiate with him. Lady Essel had no idea that he would turn out to be so smart. Stretching his arms before the new fight, Sun Jin Woo babbled on about his plan. You said there has always been a fierce fight between the clans for wounds. Then I'll raise the Radis clan to the top, he exclaimed. Apparently, at first she was bothered by the misnomer of her clan Raider. But then she blushed when she realized that he was going to spare them. Besides, the girl was curious to know the reason. He looked back to gaze into her lying eyes, and then said quietly, because I liked you. That threw her off. It certainly wasn't something anyone expected, not even him. Just like with Jinho, Sung Jin Woo was good at getting off with awkward people. On the 9th floor, the difficulty suddenly increased, as did the number of monsters and their levels, which are much different from the lower floors. Despite the increase in my intelligence, this seems insignificant, considering the rate at which I am expending mana. This is just an indication of how often shadow soldiers recover from destruction. On the 97th floor, the fact that I managed to get there quickly means nothing. Even the 4th-ranked Pistols clan and the 5th-ranked Rikadu clan. That girl asked me if other people are as strong as I am. But I told her that Gong Yi and Cha are definitely stronger than mere S ranks based on their aura. They are clearly taller and lighter than my Chong'in, who is known as a super soldier. In other words, S ranks are very different from each other. Considering the S rank strength is not limited to winter, the gap in strength is likely to be stronger than the others. At the time, I was comparable in strength to Gong Yi, but now that I have ascended to the upper floors, things can change a lot. I asked that girl if she could go back to her floor and I would take care of the rest myself. She was surprised that I didn't need her anymore. This girl was so funny to me until the very end, because she did a great job, and I was very grateful to her. But after a little thought, that girl started telling me that she wanted to come with me to see the outcome of our battle. I didn't change her mind, and eventually we started going into the portal. I told her to do as she knew how, and at the same time 2 hunters, one of whom was an S-rank hunter named Ruji Koto, came out at the international airport. He started talking to the girls who were walking with him, that there was definitely someone strong in that airport, stronger even than Koto-san. Hunter could not believe it, for he knew that such a person would never appear in such a place. But suddenly one of the men came up to them and started apologizing, for he was late because of the huge crowd. But the hunter told him that it was all right, and asked if something had happened at the airport. That guy started to say that hunters from neighboring states had flown to South Korea on a personal matter. so there was nothing to worry about. Ruji wondered, and then realized that the hunters were from the United States, because it had something to do with the unnecessary situation that was soon to occur. Ruji met with the president of the association, looked at the man, and realized that he was the only hunter capable of competing with Jinam from Asia. But the association president in turn looked at Ruji and realized that he was an unusual man. After all, there are currently about 21 S-rank hunters in Japan, and 11 of them are members of Ruji Kota's guild, called the Naked Blades. Unlike South Korea's structure with 5 different guilds that compete with each other, their one guild holds all the power. And there is no doubt that Ruji Koto holds the most power in Asia after the guild in China. The girl who came with this hunter began to tell the president that she would be their interpreter, and from then on she would relay Ruji's words. Because of the disaster a few days ago, they have decided that they can no longer turn a blind eye to Jeonju Island. Consequently, they pledged their full support to South Korea. In general, the reason he came here was to form an alliance of elite warriors. The president was unclear about what he wanted to say, which was to unite to destroy the ant colony. Now that's the best idea ever. And all was right, but the president began to talk about how he knew that the Japanese elite hunters were excellent, but that entering Challenge Island was too dangerous. Ruji waved at his interpreter before he began to speak, since he was good at Japanese. He began to talk about how, since this was an S-rank gate, they had prepared a proper plan and the data they had collected in their study of the ants. Each ant is equal in strength to a hunter above the Garong, but they have a fatal weakness, their lifespan. Ants live only 1 year. In other words, if they kill the queen, the other ants will die after 1 year, and the island will be free of their presence. The president has thought about eliminating only the queen, and that might seem more realistic than destroying every ant on the island. But getting rid of the queen is no different than destroying an entire swarm of soldier ants. The president began to ask if they didn't know that the ants were willing to give their lives for their queen. But the hunter understood, and they know it. But they would have to break through the defense line of 1,000 ants, but the current would change if they left their anthill. But the president didn't understand if that was possible. But the hunter began to say that this had happened 3 times in the past when South Korean hunters had landed to raid the island. On all 3 occasions, the ants left their tunnels and attacked the hunters. And these were just the results that were confirmed with the magic scanner, and we must now pay attention to the details. 10 of the 11 S-ranked hunters in his guild, including him, are planning to take part in the upcoming raid on the island. And they will take on the role of decoys. In the meantime, the Korean hunters will take care of the queen, and the rest of the guild members will be arriving soon. That's 10 hunters S-rank, including himself. But the president understood that if the 10 S-rank hunters drew attention to themselves, only the queen and a couple of hunters would be left in the tunnel. But Ruji knew that their hunters would split into teams and launch attacks from all sides, and the ants would rush to the site of their attacks, putting the queen in the tunnel unprotected. The South Korean hunters would infiltrate the island by helicopter and destroy the queen, then leave the island by the same transport. It turned out to be quite possible for the president, but he wondered why Ruji was willing to indicate support for all but one of the hunters. After all, every hunter in the country has a record of clearing S-rank gates. If you look at their stats after the raid on Jeonju Island, he would need to rise to the point where he would be ranked as a national-level hunter. It won't be weird for him, and there will be a lot of interest in the appearance of a national-level hunter from Japan, since it's an S-rank gate. There will be 10 guild members participating just in case, to minimize the danger to both Korea and Japan, and there is no reason to refuse. It's not exactly the right way to go, but you can't become a national-level hunter without it, and the association president understood that compared to Japan and Korea, he only had 8 S-rank hunters, if you exclude Min Bin, who had retired. In fact, only 6 hunters could participate, and this tactic from treatment would be impossible to execute with only the Korean hunter's strength. The only problem is whether they can successfully destroy the queen and whether they can do it, because no one knows for sure. Perhaps if Hunter Jin Woo, the man who single-handedly defeated the boss of the A-Rang dungeon, cooperates with other hunters and the ants evolve at an accelerating rate. The president of the association doesn't know exactly when the entire ant swarm will gain the ability to fly, and they can't wait now. The president then began to say that he had it all figured out, and they would present a specific operational plan after reviewing the data. At the same time we climbed to the 98th floor, and at this point my level was 93. Soon after, we were able to reach 100 floors and began to continue on our way. At one point, however, I noticed some strange creature flying above us in the sky, and a terrifying energy was emanating from it. As soon as I looked up, I saw a knight sitting on a great white dragon. It was the Demon King Baron, and I felt his unusual aura. After reviewing this data, they will present a specific operational plan to eliminate him. The girl who came with me felt an incredible thirst for blood, and she had never seen the Demon King in person. But her whole being literally responded to the fact that it was him, the ram. I realized that his terrifying aura could be felt even by Yesel, who stood there shaking with fear. Still, this flying monster would only get in the way, and I looked at this dragon and realized that this was the first time I encountered demonic creatures of this type. So there are other forms of transportation here. I realized that since it wasn't a demon, I could get another shadow. And at the same moment the Demon King, the ram, began to use his army skill. Out of nowhere a huge number of portals appeared, from which demon soldiers began to be summoned. There were extremely many of them, and they were approaching from all sides, surrounding us. I realized that these demonic knights and generals were at least of high rank, and there were at least 100 of them. I realized that a whole horde of demons had gathered in front of us, and they were finally acting. Alice asked me what we were going to do, but the monsters were getting closer and closer. Alice began to get nervous and yell at me to do something. But I told her it was too soon, we needed them to get even closer. As soon as they had us in the ring, she began to activate her Overlord Monarch skills, and with a shout, my shadow soldiers began to appear and destroy anyone who stepped into their shadow. All the copies they had in their hands began to attack the demons that surrounded us. At the same moment Alice couldn't believe her eyes at what was happening now, for this was the first time she'd ever seen such a battle. My shadow soldiers kept killing them. But the 3 demon generals began to move right at me, and at the same moment a large bear and my shadow soldier appeared and launched their attack. Igris, who appeared from behind, jumped on one of the demons and managed to kill it. One of my supreme soldiers, Fawn, began to activate his skill, Song of Annihilation. His wondrous aura appeared in front of him and began to destroy everyone in his field of vision. It was incredible for Alice, because she was beside me and had reached the top floor with me. But only now does she see me actually fighting. However, this area belongs to the demon Kurils, and Fawn is an intruder, someone who must be destroyed. She didn't understand and began to wonder which side she should take. But at that moment her thoughts began to get lost, because the demon lord, Baron, activated his skill and thunder erupted in the sky. Lightning started coming from the sky, striking all of my shadow soldiers, and I realized that it wasn't just lightning, but a massive spell with a stun effect. At that moment, however, I was able to activate my buff, and the elemental damage effect was nullified. Thanks to my immunity skill, I began to realize that if it wasn't stopped, all the shadow wars would turn to nothing, and my mother would immediately dry up. At the same moment I jumped on the building next to me and was able to get closer to the dragon. First I need to get rid of its wings, so I launched an attack. At that moment, however, the Demon King, Baron, blocked my strike and threw me back to the ground. I landed forcefully on the ground, my bike slid across it, and all the rocks started flying apart. I looked up and saw the Demon King Ram begin to spew lightning from his mouth, which flew straight at me. I managed to turn away in time, however. I realized that he was very fast, and that he would soon get to me. It was a good thing my cloak absorbed damage, but only within its limits. Suddenly I saw flames flying toward the Demon King. That flame used a Fong to cover me. Well, as the Fong and the Demon King began to diverge in different directions, because a collision of such terrifying power could not go in a straight line, and I, sitting on the ground, watched it and realized that I had not given him the orb for nothing after all, which increases the attack by 100%, and it was worth it. With that Fong attack, I was able to knock down the dragon, which fell to the ground toward me, and I saw the Demon King begin to get up. But I was relieved that he was already on the ground. After all, I was tired of watching him from the bottom up, and now there would be a battle between the 2 strongest bosses there are on the 100th floor. But there are actually skills that do not consume mana, and the Lord's Touch and Shadow Wars are just that. The Lord's Touch controls and affects physical objects, but the effectiveness depends directly on the weight of the object. Although this skill does not consume mana at all, the same is true for warriors, as those I save in the mist no longer need to be recalled. But things change when they are destroyed by the enemy. Soldiers begin to consume mana to regenerate. If A's mana supply runs out, they go back to my shadow. This is why it is so important to increase intelligence to maximize your mana supply. This monster has huge ones. I can say the same about his fighting power, as he controls his warriors, given the fact that they do not regenerate, he needs a lot of mana to summon them again. When the Demon King was already on Earth and walking in my direction, he used that punch again, which was aimed directly at my subordinate, Fang. However, the Fang activated his Song of Protection skill, and I realized that I was gradually losing my mana, and he wasn't giving me a chance to recover it. Now I need to think about how I should fight next. And besides, it takes a lot more mana to regenerate high-level fighters, and yet I can't give them up. I need to finish this fight before my strength runs out. In the meantime, while I was pondering, my shadow commander, Iron, began to fight the Demon King. However, the Demon King's strength was 10 times greater than Iron's, and as soon as Iron wanted to strike him, he threw his axe aside and began to attack him, resulting in Iron's defeat. There was a player who flew to the Demon King and started to attack him, but the Demon King grabbed his big sword. Just like with my previous commander-in-chief, he was able to overpower him. After that big bang, the player dissolved into small pieces. At the same moment, I realized that I needed to act while my commanders-in-chief distracted him. I immediately activated my skill, Deathstroke. However, the Demon King was suddenly able to parry it. As he parried my blow, he grabbed my head with his other hand and lifted me into the air. And now the Demon King wanted to finish me off and swing his big sword. But at that moment, the swords of my commanders-in-chief were able to parry it, and at the same moment, I inflicted mortal damage right into the heart of the big Demon King. Something strange began to happen. The Demon King began to lose his mind and shout, "You're all around." From this his aura became so powerful that it threw us all aside, and all my shadow soldiers began to disappear. I was able to shield myself from the aura emanating from him. When I opened my eyes, a Demon King appeared in front of me, holding 2 large blades in his 2 hands. He wanted to fight me, but I wasn't that easy either. I had 2 deadly daggers, which I was going to use right now. We stood looking at each other, and at the same moment, we clashed in a vivid battle. The Demon King started to attack me first, but all his attacks were in vain. I had a good grip on my daggers, and I could easily parry all of his attacks. So I decided to activate my Deadly Strike skill again and started attacking him back, but he also parried my attacks. At this distance I was faster, and with my quick attacks I was able to wound him, but suddenly he used his strange magic again, and the attack enclosed in lightning bolts went off. I parried this attack with my blades and threw it back into the sky. But with that attack, my daggers also flew away, and the Demon King was ready to strike me one last time. However, I was able to grab both of his arms and realized that his power was very great, and he had an endless supply of mana again. After all, he used it to attack me with this strange blow from his mouth. But suddenly I saw some kind of blade come and smash right into his head, flying off to the side. I couldn't figure out what had happened, but it was Alice, who was standing nearby and threw her weapon right at him. As a result, the Demon King began to pay attention to her by turning his head. And then I realized that this was my chance. I would put all my power and strength into my skill, the Lord's Touch, and strike him one last blow. As soon as I swung, I started screaming that I would end him with a single blow. I hit him on the head with full force. So I inflicted critical damage on him, and at the same moment the Demon King was destroyed. Alice was very excited about the way I destroyed him. As soon as the Demon King fell to the ground, the notification system showed me that I had collected all the demon souls, and my quest was complete. After that, I fell to the ground, and Alice was excited about it. She started to run to me, but I asked her to go and tell her father that the Radio Clan was now the very first. And as soon as I defeated the Demon King, all the clouds cleared, the sun began to shine, and at the same moment my shadow soldiers began to collect mana crystals that were lying everywhere. I also managed to find the Demon King's ring and the Demon King's half-sword, as well as the Demon King's blade. And last, and most interesting, was the Demon King's purified blood. With the Demon King's ring I finally unlocked all the effects of the set, and no doubt the items in the set are quite useful. This is the item of greatest value right now. I was able to discover the ingredient, the purified blood of the Demon King, and I finally got it. This blood has incredible magical energy. It persists even after purification. To offset the negative effects and use it for medicinal purposes, you need to mix it together with other ingredients, such as a fragment of the world tree and spring water. Alice didn't understand and started to ask me if everything was okay, because she was watching me start to do something strange. I tried to create the holy water of life and began the process of creating it. The successful creation of items, as well as their quantity, depends on the intelligence of the creator. I understood that the higher the intelligence, the better the result. Knowing this in advance, I would have spent points on other characteristics. Alice began to ask me what I was talking about now with regard to the way I created the item, and she was sure that I would succeed. Time began to run out, however, and there were literally seconds left when the item was successfully created. I was very happy, for I had finally succeeded. It took only a small portion of the Demon King's blood and a fragment of the World Tree to create the item. But the spring water of the forest was completely used up. I realized that I needed only the extract, not the whole ingredient. And holding the holy water of life in my hand, I now understood what it really looked like. It was a mysterious potion that, because of its magical power, could cure any disease, and it would only work if you drank the entire contents. I hoped that it would really help my mother. I wanted to go to the hospital right now and check it out, but suddenly I saw Iron dragging the dragon, which was lying nearby, toward me. I was intrigued by what he was doing. And when I saw the dragon, I knew that he had finally wised up. And as soon as I uttered my word rise, the dragon turned into a shadow and became my shadow soldier. I knew I couldn't collect the souls of demons, so the wyvern option seemed quite possible. I had to choose a name for my soldier, but I began to remember what his name was, but I couldn't remember what it was. But Alice realized that I had a bad memory for names, so I called him Kaisel anyway, hoping that he would give us a way to get to her clan in no time. But I didn't think we'd have to traverse every floor to get out of here, and it would take too long. Or perhaps we could have reported back at once, and Alice's father would have thrown a banquet at once, with untold joy. But what bothered me was that I hadn't even collected the rewards for the assignment. I saw that my rewards were high-grade runes and extra characteristic points, plus 30. And the last reward turned out to be a hidden one. I was interested in the rune exchange stone. It was an ability that swapped the user and the selected shadow soldier. The ability would not be able to be reactivated until 3 hours after use, and the wait time would vary depending on the level of the ability. This was a pretty cool ability for me. Even if the shadow soldier was on the other side of the world, I could still switch places with him. There was teleportation. I turned around and started saying we did a good job, apologized to Isil and told her that it looks like she'll have to go back to her clan alone. The radio clan is on the 8th floor and she won't have to go far. I started activating my Neva exchange ability and started teleporting. And as soon as I evaporated, my shadow soldier was left there, who also didn't understand why he was abandoned. As soon as I appeared in my world, I realized that I was in the vicinity of my neighborhood, and this ability really worked. But the next time I would not be able to use it until 3 hours later. I knew I had to get to my mom in the hospital as soon as possible, so I summoned my dragon Kaisel and started flying him straight to the hospital. At the same time, the investigators from the association began showing video footage sent from Japan, and it was recorded by a magic camera found on a Japanese satellite. These were recordings from the association president's first, second, and third attempts, and they showed, as Ruji had said, that all the ants, except the queen and her guards, were leaving the nest during the attack. Initially, the fact that the appearance of ants is constantly changing is evidence of their evolution with each generation. However, the sentinel ant is concerned about their lifespan, which is about a year. On the other hand, high-ranking dungeons always have several bodyguard monsters protecting bosses. The question arises as to the likelihood that they will not return to the nest before the scheduled time. The researcher began to answer the president of the association that they could use a frequency jammer. These ants are capable of communicating with each other on a special frequency, and the Rugrats planned to confuse them with the jammer. The president realized that they should only worry about the queen and her guards. Suddenly, however, the association president suspected something strange. He began to say that he had just felt a magical wave reaching him from such a distance. He wondered what it could be. The association president then asked if they had contacted Jin Woo the hunter. However, the investigator began to say that they were doing everything they could to find her, not the other way around. In one of the tents, the head of the White Tiger Guild began to ask his interlocutor if he felt the same way he did now. But Min the hunter began to say that even though he was retired, he still had his wounds with him. They wondered what was going on now, but Hunter Min began to say to forget about it, and most likely that the other hunters were tearing each other's throats out for guild shares or something like that. Then the head of the White Tiger Guild said, "One time like that, then let's have another drink." Hunter Han sat drinking with the hunter healer. He looked at him and realized that this guy was unusual. For he had an equally peculiar sense of humor. This hunter was the first S-ranked hunter to resign for no apparent reason. More accurately, he was not the first, but the only one of his kind. How could he give it all up, considering how much an S-rank hunter could earn? He did not look like a rich man, but the hunter healer began to ask the head of the white tiger if he was going to go to that island. And even after he saw that hunter die, that bitch, he said that's why he should go. If they let it go, then fate would befall the courier, too. But the hunter healer wondered since when he became so patriotic. But the head of the white tiger answered that it was nothing of the sort. He had simply decided that with such a beautiful pretext, he would go where he was going anyway. But the hunter healer began to say that he refused and would never go there. If he came to persuade him, it was in vain. The head of the white tiger replied that he just wanted to see him, for there was no telling when they could meet again. But the hunter healer began to say that he was now preparing for his teacher's exam and, so to speak, planning to become typical. He's meeting with a construction company that's recruiting outstanding hunters to start their own guild. And he gets an invitation, too. They offer him a position as head of the guild. And since he retired, he's received many similar offers from other companies. And even so, where everyone is drenched in blood, it's not for him. That's why he wants to qualify as a teacher. He was interested in subjects like Korean history. Do you need teachers for such a position? But in his mind he wondered why, of all the subjects, he chose Korean history. And he answered that he already knew that, because he loved historical dramas. The hunter healer began to say that it would be wonderful if wars only went on in history books. But the head of the white tiger answered him that he was right and that there was nothing wrong with him, and that the hunter healer didn't seem to have it in him. Although, when you think about it, there really aren't many hunters who don't like to fight monsters. There are some among healers, too, but they prefer not to heal instead. And is it possible that only those who are skilled in battle can reawaken? In the meantime, I was finally able to get to the hospital. Through the window, I made my way to the room where my sick mother lay. I realized that if nothing else, there was probably nothing I could do. Whether she would drink the holy water of life or not, it would not guarantee that everything would be okay. But I had seen just how miracles were accomplished through a system of stories that other people wouldn't believe in for anything. And even the fact that I've been able to get this far isn't scary. If I trusted her again, I leaned over, pulled out a vial, and began to approach my mother. But at this point, my hands began to shake with worry. Would it all work out? I exhaled and started pouring the healing water into my mother's mouth. That's when I noticed the scar on her face and remembered that my goal was only to wash her hair. I had accidentally doused her with boiling water, and it was my fault that she had that scar. I sat there reminiscing about the past, but at that time my mom started to change. I noticed that her skin color had become normal, and I wondered why she was still not awake. I started to ask her to open her eyes, because we only had one reason to get stronger, and she had to wake up and let me take care of her, all the hardships she was going through. I hoped it would make her feel better. At this time, my sister was sitting in her apartment, unable to concentrate. But soon she went outside and started walking somewhere. She noticed that the air in the evening was so warm, and it was because summer should be starting soon. Soon I was sitting next to my mom, hoping she would wake up. Suddenly I heard her start to talk to me. Once she was fully awake, she asked me, and I told her that it had been 4 whole years. She kept asking me how my sister was doing, and I told her she was fine. But at the time, my hands were shaking incredibly with happiness that she had finally recovered. My mom started thanking me for keeping my promise, and because she was sick it was a hard time for me, but at this point I couldn't hold back my tears and started crying holding my mom's hand. A little later, the head physician learned that the patient with the disease of sleep deprivation had woken up. It was a real miracle for him. The assistant who came up to him began to say that the patient's guardian was demanding immediate discharge from the hospital, and they didn't know what to do. But the doctor began to say that he disagreed, because her condition was still unstable. Besides, she had been unconscious for 4 whole years, and it was premature to say anything about being able to move around on her own. But the assistant began to explain that her condition was stable and it was as if she had not been sick for 4 years and her health was not in danger. She could walk unaided. The doctor didn't understand how she could be okay after being in bed for 4 years. Well, the assistant suggested that it was due to the life support machine. After that, the doctor wondered, and even if that was true, such a hasty release was not good for them and they needed to tell the whole world about the case. But the assistant said the same thing, but the guardian refused. He was an unusual man and started talking about an S-ranked hunter who had recently come to South Korea, and his name was Jin. At the same moment, the doctor turned around and began to say that they had no right to hold healthy patients against their will. And so, of course, they will let her be discharged. At the same time, my sister came into the room to meet my mother. My mom looked at her and realized that she had grown so much in those 4 years. But my sister started crying and went to hug her mother. None of us could hold back our tears. I watched the whole thing and realized that my efforts were not in vain. I think this long-awaited reunion is like a reward for all the hardships and trials I went through working as a hunter. I've often wondered if I'm constantly drifting away from them just because anxiety is eating away at me from the inside. A little later, I went outside, sat down on a nearby bench, and forgot all about my phone. While I was in demonic confusion, I had a lot of missed calls, but I figured that whoever needed to call me back would. But suddenly I saw a news story about yesterday that said that a monster had been spotted in the sky, but there was no sign of a breakthrough. I didn't want to lie, and everyone was wondering where this monster was headed. The Hunters Association gave no comment, and people began to wonder if they could live safely in Peace City. I realized that even the slightest stupidity of mine could become the most talked about event. But suddenly I got a call, and when I picked up the phone, I realized that the chairman of the association himself was calling me. I began to ask what had happened, and the chairman began to explain that he was already sure I had heard the news. But I didn't understand what he was talking about. I immediately began to say that it was probably about my dragon, because rumors spread very quickly. I apologized and said I would be more careful in the future, but he didn't know what I was talking about. I realized that he wasn't calling me because I'd flown the dragon the previous night, so I started to ask him what had happened. After all, I had just arrived, and I was out of touch. The chairman began to say that I really wasn't up to date, and it would be more convenient for them if he came and we discussed everything face to face. But I said that I would come and see them myself. A little later, I was already at the main association building, and the chairman started telling me that the raid would begin in 2 days, and they would go to the island of these ants once and for all. And they would need my help to do it. All the citizens want to go back to this island, and the chairman suggested to me, would you like to join them? I started to think about how I would definitely have said yes before, since this place is just crawling with high-level monsters. But now I got to be with my family, and suddenly I felt an incredible magical power. The chairman asked me what was wrong. I told him there was nothing wrong, but there must be a guy passing somewhere between the hunters. The chairman smiled and realized that, as expected, I had good instincts. I could sense the power of the hunters at that distance. He began to say that the S-Rang hunters were actually warming up in the gym, and they only had 4 days left before the raid on the island. And the Ryuji, his Japanese hunters, are there, too. And as soon as I heard that name, I asked the chairman again about that Ryuji guy. He's talking now, and the chairman replied that I got it right, and it's the name of the strongest Japanese hunter that even the most ordinary citizen has heard of. And I must see for myself that this is where he is. At this time there was a sparring going on between 2 hunters who began to wrestle. One of them was definitely stronger and in an instant threw the other hunter over his hip and he fell to the ground. One of the hunters began shouting that young men like theirs had to put in a lot more effort. They kept fighting over it. The aura inside the room was terrifying. At this time I was watching the whole battle, and it was unusual for me to see all the hunters of such a high level in one place. The magical energy I had felt earlier was emanating from them. At the same time, a hunter called Absolute Weapon started walking up to us, and he started saying that we hadn't seen him in a while. I started asking him, watching this fight, what he said. It turned out that Hunter Baekhyun wasn't using all his power, but why was he hiding it? After all, Hunter Dongwook is clearly not the kind of opponent to relax with. But he replied that it would be rather impractical to show off all of his abilities when there are so many eyes around. After all, President Beck turns into a real monster when he fights, and I realized that the rumors about his transformation were true after all. And the people who were gathered there, they were hunters from the Glory Guild, one of the top 5 guilds in the nation. With assets in Khan territory, they are sure that the Glory Guild ranks 4th, while the White Tiger and the Reapers are at the top. I looked up at Ryuji Goto and realized that he was that S-ranked Japanese hunter. But at the same moment, other hunters took notice of me, and one of the girls started asking me who the hunter on the balcony was. Another girl, associating me with Hunter Jin Woo, who had recently obtained S-rank status, also paid attention to me. But he didn't realize if I really had the assassin class, because he started to feel my power even though I was trying to hide it. So he wondered, is it possible that I am an excellent hunter of the assassin class? The translator girl who was near Ruji started telling him that I belonged to the magic class, and it was officially confirmed information. The other hunters also started to look in my direction and guessed that this was the guy who had thwarted Minsung's debut. Hunter Cha looked at me and realized that this was why the air had changed so much. And it was all because of me. Another girl who was wearing a special mask started telling a guy who looked like an S-rank hunter that she looked like him and was standing Korean Hunter 10, Orang. But that guy started replying to her not to talk to him, because he's about to throw up from all those hunters. This masked guy noticed the Cha hunter and started guessing that there are people in South Korea with the same sensitive sense of smell as him, and she uses a regular handkerchief to neutralize the smell. So her sensitivity level is much lower than his. If he suddenly walks up to her and starts talking, wouldn't it look like he has a crush on her? He would if he knew Korean. Hunter Ruji stood with his translator and she started asking him if it was really better to be in South Korea. They didn't seem to be their equal, but Hunter Ryujin started to ask her why she thought that, and she started to say that she had witnessed Gata-san sweeping the dungeons many times and other S-rank hunters didn't interest her anymore. But Ruji started telling her that that wasn't true at all, and there was still one capable hunter here. Her name is Cha, and she's another fire hunter. He, and only these two can be compared to their best fighters. But suddenly the head of the Knights Guild started talking, and the translator just said that she thought he wouldn't understand what she was muttering there in her Japanese. But for this guy, Japanese was a second language he had learned in high school. However, the translator decided to ask who he was, and it turned out to be the head of Jiangsu. But this was the first time she had heard that name. It was all because he was a Ranka hunter, and because of that, she might not have known about him. However, the Knight Guild was one of the top 5 guilds in South Korea. The translator didn't understand who Jong Sun, a rank hunter from South Korea, was and decided to ask him if he would join the raid on Jeonju Island. She had heard that only S-rank hunters would participate. However, Jong Sun was part of the defense squad responsible for blockading the island, and it was a very important role. But the translator didn't care about that as it was a relief for her. After all, they can't rely on A-rank hunters for such an important task. Ruji started telling the translator that if she was causing trouble, she should stop right now. Soon after that, Jong Sun turned around and left, saying that after all, what could a girl translator know? But she heard that and started telling him that he wanted to see with his own eyes what she was capable of. The interpreter girl was very serious and decided that he could not say that he could defeat the hunters who had only come here as an interpreter. Jong Sun started to tell her to stop looking down on him. But as soon as she told him that he was of the non-combatant hunter class, he started to get angry. At this time, I was standing on the balcony watching along with a hunter called Absolute Weapon, and I realized that South Korea and Japan would be fighting orange hunters amongst themselves, and it would be quite entertaining. Things got heated downstairs, and Jong Sun started saying that we should set up a couple rules to start with. It would be much better than the usual pugilism. The rules were simple. The first one to grab the other's wrist wins, and if he grabs her first, she loses. The translator realized that if she started attacking, she would be caught and he would lose too, and she needed to think carefully about every move she made, because this rule implied mental activity as well. Jong Sun was already ready, but the translator didn't like what he saw. Jong was ready to fight her in that pose. However, he replied to tell her not to worry, because he wouldn't need to use his hand except to grab her. She realized that he was very confident in his speed and decided to start. She rushed with all her speed straight at him, but he dodged every attack she made. At that same moment, she decided to prove to him that she wasn't bluffing and was ready to decisively end this sparring right now. And as soon as she swung her arm, she saw that Jong Sun didn't want to just attack like that. He decided to make just a light thrust and was sure that she understood it herself. But she replied that she didn't fully understand his dialect, and more importantly, it wasn't cool at all to stand in that pose. After all, his entire crotch is literally visible as his pants were torn between his legs at this point. And at that very moment, she sprang into action and took a swing at him. But Jong Sun grabbed her wrist and started telling her that she was too slow. And at that same moment, the sparring was over. She didn't understand how this could happen, but Jong Sun started to say that she was the kind of person who follows the tank, and it was incredible not to see that her experience in fighting people was extremely low. After all, stuff happens in Korea, and sometimes you have to fight people, and in the worst case scenario, you have to kill them. And she'll regret it if she doesn't take that into account. Unlike monsters, people's movements are much harder to read, and if she had a knife in her hands, it would have slit her throat instead of grabbing Ruji's wrist. Watching this, he started to say that it was a pretty good sparring session, and he asked his translator if she could relay the message that she wanted to address everyone here. And she began to translate that he had an idea that he wanted to propose to the Koreans in the name of strengthening their relationship. How about we spar using the same system as the S-rank hunters? I started going down with the president of the association, and he started saying let's exclude magical and unusual classes because they would be harder to evaluate. We also decided to add a couple rules. Whoever grazes their opponent's back or knocks them to the floor will be considered the winner. Instead of a one-on-one duel, we are offering a group competition. In other words, it doesn't matter who their opponent is. When the translator conveyed all of this to Ruji, he began to realize what it meant that the team that was the first to knock out a member of the other team would control the move. The hunter-killers would have a huge advantage if they followed the previous rule. He replied that he agreed to have South Korea fight against Japan's 4 hunters. I stood there watching and realized that Ryujin didn't seem to have decided to participate. He wants to observe them, and anyway, it's not every day you get to see a fight between S-rank hunters. And it's a good thing I came here today. One of Japan's hunters started to speculate that he could draw some conclusions about their strength based on their recent fight, but it seemed to him that this guy had an ace up his sleeve. The girl from Japan's squad was also watching and realized that this was a 4x4 battle, which meant her opponent would be the other girl across from her, and so they had already decided to start sparring. One of Japan's hunters realized that his opponent was capable of transforming into a giant, and he would surely enjoy the battle, relying only on pure strength. It would be great, just great. That's what a real man should be like. They clashed in a fierce battle and decided to see who would be the stronger of the two. At the same moment, the other hunters also began to fight, and one of them noticed that the other was very fast and confident in his speed. If he got even a millimeter closer, he would be finished. But luckily for him, he specializes in long range and attacks. He threw his magic arrow that flew at the opponent. They continued to fight, but some had an advantage in strength. The president of the association looked at all of this and realized that this training center had been built and fortified with powerful magic stones. Average hunters wouldn't be able to leave a dent here, as these guys had made a mess of the place in literally seconds. Letting these youngsters participate in the battle is a rather unfortunate decision, as their opponent is the strongest S-rank hunter. They must be wary, as he can not only grab their arm, but also break it. At this point, one of the Japanese hunters realized that his opponent was using cheap tricks and no one said he would follow the rules and only aim for the arms and back. After all, he decided that only the strongest would survive here. And at one moment he approached his opponent, he wanted to deliver a bloodthirsty blow, but he backed away and threw himself aside. His opponent realized it was bloodlust. I wondered why he had retreated, and most likely, he was just scared. But the masked guy started to say that he was overexcited again, because being a hunter was not for him. His opponent started to reflect that he wasn't wrong, and his name is Kumamoto. He doesn't even know if he is a great tactician or just a coward, but still, he decided that he is particularly aggressive. Ruji seems to want to see the level of their abilities with this guy, but the Korean Association hunter has decided that his opponent is ready for what's about to happen. After all, if he's going to treat him like a guinea pig and just a little bit, he's going to get a lot more serious. His masked opponent realized that his eyes had changed, and to him it was horror. For he no longer wanted to be here. The hunter from the South Korean Association started moving straight at him with amazing speed. And as soon as he threw one punch, the man dodged, and he realized that he was more cowardly than he thought. His awakening was going to put him at the top among all S-rank hunters. The spectators who were watching all of this realized that they were even bigger monsters, and compared to them, his battle was just child's play. But suddenly, there was a loud sound and everyone saw that the big guy from the South Korean Association was toppled to the ground, and he couldn't believe his eyes because it was the first time for him. At the same moment, the other South Korean Association guy was also pinned against the wall and his hands were grabbed. Now there was a battle going on in which 4 were fighting too, and the Japanese Association was in the majority. However, the hunter from South Korea was unwilling to give up and began to tell them who would attack him next. He knew that whoever fought him would regret it. At the same time, a battle started between the two girls. Huntress Cha attacked with amazing speed, and her opponent didn't expect her to be so fast. But it wasn't just that. The opponent couldn't find a gap in Huntress Cha's defense. She used to be called a dancer, and she earned this nickname due to her agile movements that resembled a dance. This trait allowed her to incapacitate her opponent very quickly. However, due to her guild leader's ban, she no longer used this nickname, so only a few people know about it. Huntress Cha swung, and with that speed, her opponent's cap flew to the side. At the same moment, the Huntress moved behind his back and touched his back. Once she was done with that girl, she decided to hurry up and help her partner, Baek Yun, who was fighting against the two. But at that moment, the third hunter approached her and started to say that he knew that those two could not be bothered with, so he decided to deal with Hunter Cha. As soon as he approached her, she reacted and started attacking him with quick movements right on his face. Those who were watching all of this couldn't understand what had happened. After all, it looked like arrows shot from a machine gun. They didn't realize how many times she had struck her fist, maybe around 10 times, even more. Such a large number of punches in such a short period of time made it impossible for him to block them. At this moment, the huntress realized that she had overdone it a bit, and Hunter Kumamoto was covered in blood from those punches. From that moment on, he began to get angrier and angrier, and being in that state, he became completely different. And it wasn't even a change of personality, he was just losing his mind. And at the end of the fight, he didn't remember anything. He could use not only forbidden techniques, but also attack even his allies. And in the end, in a ranked dungeon without outside help. But if he's involved in conquering rank gates, then him waking up as an S rank doesn't make any sense. Ruji started talking about how if anyone from the Korean team was in danger, they should be stopped immediately. He only wanted to check on them, but the translator started telling him that if he wanted to restore him, it was best to do it right now. After all, they wouldn't be able to afford compensation for the damage done. And as soon as that guy got angry, he was already standing there looking at Hunter Cha with his terrifying gaze. The huntress realized that he was too fast, and his punch was already flying straight at her. As soon as he hit, he was surprised that his foot was stopped, and there I was, covering the huntress. I started telling her that it was just a competition and his bloodlust was going over the top. I asked the huntress if she minded if he interfered. But that guy got even angrier and started attacking me. In an instant, I was able to grab his arm and twist him, putting him on the ground. Ruji, who was watching all this, didn't realize what kind of move this was and asked his translator if she was sure he was a magic class hunter. He started to say, "Hunter Cha, I think the best solution right now is to accept the Korean team's defeat." And I agreed, because it looked like Hunter Beck had also been caught. However, I realized that the gap in their skills was quite large, and even if he reincarnated, it wouldn't change anything. Suddenly, I heard someone start talking to me, and it was Ryujo. The translator started translating that he wanted to fight me one-on-one. I looked at him and realized that it was an aura permeating everything around him. Even without an interpreter, I can understand what he's trying to accomplish and what he wants. On his own, he wants to find out what I'm capable of, but I don't know what his motives are. But this is just a way to find out how strong I've become since the demonic castle. Ruji looked at me and didn't understand why I was smiling, and at that moment, the translator started to tell him that Jin Woo accept his offer, but only on one condition. He said he would accept his offer if he fought at full strength. The other hunters didn't understand what was going on here, but Ruji was curious since they had a high-ranked healer with them now. This fight shouldn't lead to serious consequences. He started to say that he liked that suggestion and asked the healer to take care of the wounded, especially himself, and pointed a finger at himself. At my place, the other hunters with the Korean Association started speculating that this was the little-known 10th hunter. And one of the hunters couldn't believe that this youngster would fight the very Ruji go-to, the Cha hunter. She started to ponder that nothing would happen since he had single-handedly cleared the rank dungeon and killed 100 higher orcs. But suddenly Hunter Beck started telling her that she was doing pretty well despite having so many hunters around. She replied to him that she couldn't be constantly distracted by her charms, especially when they arrived on the island. In response, she started to ask him that he had said that he was already familiar with the hunter Jin Woo and maybe he should stop this fight. But he replied that it was logical since it was about Ruji himself personally fighting. However, for the same reason as herself, he wants to watch this fight, so he won't interfere, because the very thought of this fight excites him. If Jin Woo can build up his power, then perhaps he has become much stronger than he was in their last encounter. At this same moment, I decided to start our fight, but I didn't expect my opponent to act before I decided to start. His hand was already near my face, but I successfully dodged it. I was also very fast, and as soon as I gave myself away from him, he attacked me before I even finished speaking. But Ruji was sure that I wasn't magic class, after all those nimble movements and silent gait. He began to ponder that I wouldn't be able to fool him, and decided to reveal all my secrets, continuing until he knew everything I was hiding. I looked at him and realized that he wasn't like the other hunters at all, and there was a much greater power lurking within him. But his so-and-so wasn't a hindrance to me at all, and as I smiled after dodging his attacks, my opponent began to get angry. The Japanese hunters, while watching this, pondered, should they stop this fight? After all, Ruji took this battle with complete seriousness, and he had very intimidating attacks. The other hunters could barely keep up with them. But Hunter Jin Woo was holding up quite well, and not everyone could dodge so many blows from Japan's best hunter. Hunter Cha pondered on the fact that Hunter Jin Woo was not holding back despite the endless attacks from Ruji. It was as if he was taunting him, thus provoking him. At the same moment, the hunter called Absolute Weapon returned, and he noticed this battle and realized that something interesting had happened while he went out for a smoke. Ruji kept attacking and didn't realize if he could even dodge this attack or if it was just a fluke. He realized that as long as he wasn't fighting at full strength, there was no positive outcome to this battle, so he changed his mind and decided to just kill me. And at that moment, I received a notification from the system that I began to feel someone's overwhelming bloodlust in the immediate vicinity. I realized that if I played for even a short while, the system might give me an emergency quest, like it did in the battle with the warden in one of the dungeons. And after his last attack, just a little more and I would have lost an eye, but he didn't realize what a crazy power that was. After all, he might as well have caught my wrist, but before he started, grabbed my arm instead. He got mad and thought I was messing with him. But at this point I wasn't sure I had him right. But if I had grabbed his wrist, our fight would have been over immediately. But I knew he didn't want that either. As soon as I got serious, we swung, and the earth beneath our feet began to tremble from our swings. The other hunters didn't wait and decided to stop us. And as soon as they got close, they started holding our hands, and one of the hunters built a wall of ice. One of the hunters declared that this was enough. After all, this man would be leading the Japanese hunters in a few days, and they could not take responsibility if he was suddenly hurt. As the duel went beyond the bounds of reason, one of the hunters asked the interpreter to end the practice battles. Hunter Beck came up to me and started saying that maybe he shouldn't have gotten involved, but I replied to him that it was fine. Another hunter smiled and said that not only did I manage to stand up to Ruji, but I only got away with a single scratch on my cheek. He went on to say that my body is very strong and I have a great physique like magic class hunters. But they are short on fighters. He suggested to me, if I haven't joined anywhere yet, why don't I join their hunters? But another hunter who was standing on the balcony started yelling at him that Jin Woo's hunter was also magic class. I stood there and realized that I had gone a little overboard. I now know the strength of all the hunters gathered here. In addition, I noticed something else. Most of the hunters among them, none of them noticed my shadow soldiers, and that's despite them being high-level hunters. I was even surprised that Ruji couldn't sense anything. I started talking in the head of the Hunters Association about what he was asking. Would I participate in Shinju Island? The president of the association couldn't believe what he just heard, but at this time, the interpreter started asking Ruji if he was alright. He felt strange somehow and was looking at the ground, because something happened after that battle. The next day in the White Tiger Guild, Hunter Beck sat in his chair and pondered whether it was possible that being twice awakened had limitless growth. Also, how much a Jin Woo hunter would cost them. But he realized that it was useless to try to invite new hunters into the guild right now. However, there are still ways to contact them. And now it was time for Plan B. As soon as his phone rang, he saw the final list of participants, which would take place in 4 days. And there was no Hunter Jin Woo in Tomsk. Which he couldn't believe his eyes. Well, at the same time, Hunter Ruji was on the phone and told Hunter Matsumoto that there was a pretty capable hunter in Korea too. But he heard back that he was probably weaker than him, and Ruji started to say that he didn't even know his name. Matsumoto asked what his name was, and Ruji replied that it was Hunter Jin Woo. And he had reawakened and had just recently gotten his rank. But Matsumoto first said that it was kind of weird because there was no such name, and Ruji didn't know what he was talking about. And he started to say that the final list of Korean hunters participating in the raid just came in, and these 6 people will be leaving in 4 days as part of the Korean team. Ruji couldn't understand why the president couldn't form a team without an artificial hunter with an orangutan. But it didn't matter anymore, because there are 16 hunters participating this time and there shouldn't be any problems. Ruji realized that he was worried for nothing, and would call again when the raid started. But at the same time, on that island where the hunters will be going in 4 days, the queen of the ants was saying that they should leave that island because there is no food here and the ants are eating other ants. There is no food on this land now to feed the people of the kingdom, and it can't go on like this. They need an even stronger army, the strongest soldiers, to protect the people of the kingdom and the kingdom itself. They will make the enemy tremble in fear of them. That ant, who was in the egg and was the biggest, began to say that he would make the enemies tremble with fear of him. He must make his enemies tremble with fear of all the ants, for he must become much stronger than anyone else and become the strongest. And as soon as he emerged from his egg, streams of strong energy began to erupt on this island, accompanied by a terrifying aura. But a little while later I went and got my mother and my sister and we arrived at the apartment. However, the apartment was a huge mess. As soon as we walked in and I saw it, I realized that while I was in the demon castle, the place had turned into a mess. But my mother started saying that household chores after 4 years are no big deal. After all, they would clean up all together. We started to clean up, and my mother told us that this house was already quite old, and a lot of dirt had appeared in places that weren't really visible. I answered her that we had been living here since we were kids, so it was no surprise. But suddenly my mother asked me, and while she was sleeping, I happened to hear nothing about my father. I answered her that I hadn't heard, because if I had told her that I had also become a hunter like my father, I wondered how she would have reacted. There's a reason why it's taking Mom so long to leave this apartment. Even though I've already made more money than people usually realize, and there's a reason why we still live here. My mom is still waiting for my dad, who is missing, and suddenly he'll be back here, in this house, at the same time. One day one of the guys started talking about ants and their terrifying rate of development. Each new species of ant especially dominates all the previous ones, and they call this evolution. What everyone sees on the screen now are the ants from the first and second raids. When they first appeared, they were crawling around like normal ants. If you look at them now, their appearance is different only because they are huge. Now this is the appearance of the ants filmed during the third raid. These ants can walk upright like humans, and the huge head is noticeably smaller, allowing them to move nimbly. They can use their 4 legs as arms. In just 2 years, the specifics of their species have changed dramatically. A recent image of an ant that caused a lot of damage in Japan raises concerns. They have become even more human-like, but they now have huge wings on their backs. They are now able to fly, and that was one of the reasons why the Korean team joined this battle. Of course, if the opponent is such a monster, most hunters would want to run away. However, there was a hunter who dared to participate. Even though he had retired, I was walking down the street and reading the comments on my phone. It said, "Why is Jin Woo named missing from the Korean list?" And just because he became S rank doesn't mean his character has changed. There are ranks that will forever remain within a person. Some people started to scoff that I had wet myself and ran away, but I didn't care. However, I realized that Jin would be worried, so I decided to call him and ask him if he was still living at the motel. He replied that he had found a new place not too long ago, and luckily his mom had contacted him. He suggested that I walk with him and see the place. As soon as we met, he started telling me that the first thing I needed to start a guild was an office, and he chose the best one near my house. I asked him if it was too big for the 2 of us, but he didn't understand what I was saying. After all, a guild head, a deputy guild head, and a staff member, there should be at least 3 hunters to make a guild. I realized that we needed to hire 1 more person, and I wondered if among the hunters I knew, there would be someone who would join us so we could start a guild. But suddenly Jin told me that someone was looking for me, and it was a man who spoke English. He said he would be in Korea until July 17th and hoped I would contact him, but I didn't realize who it could be, a foreigner speaking English. After all, I am not familiar with such people. And at this point I made some obscure joke and started telling Jin that I needed to go home, and at that very moment I, being in my seat, saw my shadow soldier in utter horror. I sensed that some man was threatening the girl with a knife and yelling at her if she peeps anything she will die immediately, because she has no idea how many people died here. She was crying very loudly and begging him not to kill her, but he looked at her with a horrifying look and said that this neighborhood was just the way he liked it. But I was already behind him and started telling him that I liked this neighborhood too, and I was wondering why he was doing this. I asked him, but he turned around and started asking me why on earth I decided to teach him. I realized he wasn't in the mood for a friendly conversation. He started moving right towards me with his knife in his hands and saying it was all so much fun. And just as he was breaking a sweat, he touched me with his shoulder. He wanted to throw body blows at me, but he ended up failing.